Hey there. I wanted to make this video to go over a trial that I had earlier this week. I talked to a couple of friends and I thought it might be nice to kind of get this information out of my head afterwards, kind of a post review of what happened. This first video, I'm actually just going to kind of go over the plan I had. I probably should have made this video a few weeks ago or a month ago, so I could get some feedback and suggestions, show some, of my friends that have experience in law. Because I was just representing myself in the case. It was a traffic ticket, a couple tickets that I was dealing with. So in this video, I'm just going to kind of go over preparations I had done. I had been dealing with the things. The ticket was initially from last year, and I had kind of the arraignment, I believe it was called, back in like March, maybe April. So I wanted to look over some of the things that I got prepared. I've been submitting some documents to the court and stuff. In the meantime, I had filed a motion to dismiss that was denied, but I don't think the judge had ever actually looked over the information. I don't know, can't verify that. I can't at this point. So yeah, I'll just look over my preparations and kind of show the plan that I had intended, and then next video I'll talk about how it actually went. So I have gathered from different places travel packets or the right to travel folders, these kinds of things, citing court cases and other documents confirming that the people have an inalienable right to travel, that the government doesn't have a right to infringe on that, and getting licenses and registration and stuff like that is an infringement on that natural right. They often discuss as well that driving is a separate commercial activity that is under the jurisdiction of governments, and that's an argument that can be made. I don't know if I personally believe that, because from where do governments derive that power to control commerce? I don't know. I haven't settled that in my mind yet. But first, so we'll look at this pages. That's my preparation for the trial that I had. My plan reads as this. First, 1. Keep the first part simple. Stick to making it obvious that they don't have valid authority or jurisdiction over you. Number 2. If after a few rounds in section 1 of simple jurisdiction not being properly established, go on to the section 2, starting with the hypothetical situation. Number 3. Step 3. If it is still not established, it can't be. I do not consent. Make public note that they are witnesses that jurisdiction has not been satisfied, but you are being forced to move on. Step 4. Go on to section 3 and begin with the reminder about ancestors' freedoms. Step 5. Ask the questions to the judge. Step 6. Ask questions to the cop. And 6. Closing. So that was just kind of my general plan, so that I could have that in front of me to refer to to remind myself where I was aiming for. After that, I have a reminder that about plea, that I have a friend that mentioned that you should have an unsigned plea entered, but not to have a plea officially done, that you have to establish jurisdiction before a plea can be made. I believe I was required to, I didn't plead not guilty, but they only gave me the options to plead innocent, not innocent, or no contest. And I wanted to plead innocent, but they would not allow me. So they forced, I believe, at my arraignment, they forced a non-guilty plea, which I believe is a crime to force someone to plea. And I believe I had worded it, as my friend suggested, that I intend to plea innocent once a matter of jurisdiction is established. So I was not refusing to plea. I was just saying that jurisdiction needed to be established first. So anyways, going on to this note before my preamble, I have plea. Do not plea until jurisdiction is established. Reminder, do not make claims. Ask questions to establish facts and force them to make claims. And to repeat, how is that proof of jurisdiction, as I'm asking how they have proof of jurisdiction. And then right before the trial, one of my friends sent me a note about establishing facts. And I was thinking about that today, that I really wish I'd been clear about just saying, let's establish the facts of the court and let's establish the facts of the case. So moving on, the preamble. I have first note that I am a living man with the given name Dustin Hill. I believe there might be a misunderstanding that I am the person, the legal fiction, listed as the defendant, all caps, Dustin Hill, in this case. Because of my interest in the defendant, I make a special appearance here. I do not consent to the jurisdiction of this court, and my being here should not be mistaken as such. Nor do I consent to be governed by the constitutions from which I believe the court, the state, county, and the city claim authority. Nor do I waive any of my rights now or at any point. I do not submit or stand under the court, and any use of the word understand is meant to communicate comprehension. And also note, I am here as a result of coercion. Threats to myself, my rights, and my property have been made. Having already been a victim of extortion when I was deprived of my property, my private automobile, against my will, I fear that other threats that have been made to violate my life, liberty, and property are not idle threats. So that was my preamble that I wanted to state before we got into anything else. I'll go into next video into how that didn't go as planned. So now I'm moving on to section 1. And I first wanted to establish jurisdiction and authority, simply at first. I have the note to myself, during this portion, stick to asking how the evidence they claim is proof of jurisdiction or authority. Do not let them proceed until it is clear that after several attempts to make it clear that you do not fall under their jurisdiction. First point. In many obvious and clear ways, this case can be handled very quickly and simply. Have I not tried to do this before with emails to the court to respect everyone's valuable time and save unnecessary use of tax money taken from the people and used here? Next. Would you, the judge, agree that it would not be appropriate for the case to move forward if proper authority or jurisdiction is not established? Next question. Does the court derive its authority from the people? Going along with that idea, do legitimate governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed? Next question. Am I a living man, one of the people from which the government and court claims to derive its power and authority? And I should have, hindsight, I should have asked from which the constitutions claim to derive their power and authority. Next question. Do you have proof of my consent? Next question. Would government powers exercised over me be unjust if I have not consented? Next question. I understand some people may commit actual crimes and try to escape justice using similar arguments concerning consent when they have actually caused harm or damage to other people or their property. So I ask, is the plaintiff who has brought charges against me one of the living people exercising their natural right to seek justice and is using the court to assist in that rightful process? Because I guess I didn't mention that in my opening. I meant to, that I intend to live honorably and respect the rights of people, and any time that I violate someone else's rights, I take responsibility for that, and I'm willing to do what is necessary to achieve justice in that situation. Going back to my questions, if this is a justice court, then what injustice exists to justify here in this case? Next question. If there is no legitimate injustice to resolve, is there legitimate reason to continue? And then I have the notes to specify. Have I been accused of doing wrong to any man or woman? Is this a criminal or a civil case? If it's a criminal case, there must be an element of causation. Can you demonstrate where or how I harmed any man or woman? If there's no harm, how can this be a criminal case? If it's a civil matter, where is the contract under which I am in violation, I suppose? Then I had the note before moving on to section 2. It seems, looking at the simple, obvious fact that the court and government claim authority from the people who must consent to being governed, which consent I do not give, is not working. So will I need to expand into further, more complex arguments? And at that point, I was hoping to have the judge just be like, nope, we haven't established jurisdiction. Let's figure it out. Section 2. I have the note. Give an example of if a neighbor started an organization with a group of other neighbors and tried to force you to comply with the extra rules they made to increase safety. Just kind of the example that people can make organizations, and they can claim a territory, but unless the people they're claiming to govern over consent, then their rules are arbitrary. and don't apply to the people that haven't consented to the rules of that organization. So I have the section organizations and legitimate authority. First question in that section: are people able to create organizations with rules to govern that organization? Next, are they able to impose those rules on others who do not belong to that organization? Next, are they able to force or coerce others into joining their organization? Next, are punishments imposed on people outside of the organization legitimate? Next, do the organization you represent here today have proof of my agreement to follow their rules? Next, if punishment from your organization are imposed on people who are outside of your organization, would those punishments be legitimate? Next section. I kind of wasn't sure. I'd put kind of in my last edits, I put question marks around this. I'm not sure if I would cover this. But that section is called Living People versus Legal Fictions. First question: would it be helpful to the understanding of the court if I asked a few questions about the difference between natural realities and legal fictions? Next question: if we had woken up this morning and the governing states had been dissolved, would you, the judge, still exist as a living man? Would I still exist as a living man? Would, all caps, my full name, still exist? Would you, the judge, still exist as a judge? And my point here, I try to make it into a question. Do we exist as natural realities and ideas such as judges, courts, St. George City, which was the plaintiff, and state of Utah are fiction if they're fictional legal creations? And I point out they are derivatives of ideas. They do not exist in reality. They cannot possess legitimate moral power over reality, and they do not have natural rights, and because they are constructs, so they can't have natural rights. They don't exist naturally. The next section I have is self-evident truths. First question: does this court recognize the self-evident truth that people are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, including the rights of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and property? Next question: do legal fictions possess those same natural rights? Next, does this court recognize the self-evident truth that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed? Next, do the people who create a sovereign state have to be sovereign in order to do that? And then I have a note that I wanted to find a quote about the people being sovereign, or I know there are court cases that establish that. Next question: are we, the living people in this room, sovereign men and women from whence the various governments claim their own legal sovereignty and authority? Next section: source of authority. Where does this court derive its authority from? Does the court ultimately get its authority from the Utah State Constitution? Next, does the Utah State Constitution derive its authority from the people? If not, from where? If the state which derives its power from the people can create courts, is it correct to assume that the people from which they derive their powers can form their own courts? Is the Utah State Constitution the highest claim of authority this court has, or is it subject to other rules, such as the U.S. codes or Universal Commercial Code? Next, if the court is held under rules other than the Utah State Constitution, would that other set of rules also or actually be a source of their authority? And then, I guess I didn't write this down, but in my mind I meant to ask, if it is derived from somewhere else, does that authority have any jurisdiction or power over me? Next question: is Utah a sovereign state? Next, am I one of the people of Utah? Next, do you have an actual, not implied, evidence of my consent to the Utah State Constitution? Next, if you agreed to the statement earlier about just and legitimate governments... Oh, I didn't finish that question, so I'm not going to ask it. Next, if the court's legitimate authority isn't proven or recognized as legitimate, and the case still moves forward, but I continue to withhold my consent, what are the consequences if I were to refuse to comply? My intent with that question is, at the end of that section, to force them to admit that they are using coercion to move forward. And then I have the note to myself: if they choose to move forward, even though they can't prove legitimate authority, which they can't because they don't have it, address that specifically with the following statement before moving forward, especially if that force was implied. And I have the instruction to myself: say the following: If the court has been unable to establish clear and proper authority and jurisdiction, and my consent to such, which I just added right now, would those present here today be witness to the fact that moving forward in this case will be illegitimate and unjustified, a violation of my rights, an invalid use of government authority? And also, would it not be furthering injustice rather than pursuing justice, which seems to be the fundamental purpose of a justice court? So that was, I wanted to make that statement before being required to move on. And then I have the section 3. And then I had the note to tell a story about, or just the situation that our ancestors had the freedom to travel, use wagons in dangerous situations without a license or having their wagons registered, and their early cars as well. And then to establish that governments at that point still had an interest in order and protecting the people and having public safety, but the people at that point didn't require licenses. And I meant to establish that as to point out that traveling and using your own private property to travel is a natural and inalienable right. So that was that page. Going on with section 3, I had this subnote after that story. I would like to point out Article 1, Section 27 from the Utah State Constitution, not because I am held to it, but because the court, the county, and the city are. And that Article 1, Section 27 states, frequent recurrence to the fundamental principles is essential to the security of individual rights and the perpetuity of free government. So that was taken from the Utah State Constitution, from which the courts derive their authority. I thought it would be important to establish that they need to be reminded with frequent recurrence of the fundamental principles. So that was what I was doing in this case, is I was going over a lot of these fundamental principles. I guess a hint of the next video, and they did not respect that. Next point under that, after that story, it is my intention to continue to recur these fundamental principles in case it has not been done frequently enough. And then I had a kind of my opening statement once the trial was going forward and I knew that they weren't going to respect the fact that they don't have proper jurisdiction. I had this statement: I was raised being taught that I live in the land of the free, where constitutional republics were established to protect the inalienable rights of the people. So I ask, what is freedom? Have I been a fool to believe that the principles this nation and state were founded upon? I see a disturbing contrast from these ideals I was taught and have studied, and the realities as the government becomes the very problem it was established to protect the people from. That worries me, and that is one of the reasons I'm standing up for my rights and am not quietly submitting to unjust demands as many others do. I understand safety and order are held up as issues of extreme importance, but in seeking those things, governments must first and continually respect the inalienable rights of the people as they pursue safety, order, or any other political function. Otherwise, they undermine their very purpose for existing. Considering the possibility of such undermining, it was my understanding that courts were established to protect the people from such abuses from the executive and legislative branches of government. And I have high hopes that this court will do what is right today and not just stand by as the actions of the legislative and executive branches infringe on the people's rights. Do we not each have liberty to live freely and exercise the natural inalienable rights our Creator has given us, as long as we respect the equal rights of other people to live in the same free manner? So then I move on to the section of justice. And I kind of reviewed these a little bit in the first section, but I go over it a little bit more depth in section 3 here. I guess that was last section 2. Is it okay we take a moment to further consider the issue of justice, since this is a so-called justice court? What is justice? Black's Law Dictionary defines it as protecting rights and punishing wrong using fairness. According to that definition, it seems we must establish the rights of both sides of this case and look at what wrongs have occurred on each side as well for justice to be sought. Am I correct in that? Next question. Who is the victim? Next question. What injustice, harm, wrong, or violation of rights has been claimed by St. George City? Next question. Has there been any injustice, harm, wrong, or violation of rights done to me in this case? Next point. Merriam-Webster gives the following definition of justice: the quality of being just, impartial, or fair. And so then I move on to the section of fairness. Question 1. Can I take a moment to consider fairness in this case and in this trial? Question 2. Is it true that the police are able to lie at times and still be legally protected? And then follow-up question to that, is the judge able to lie to the like the police are able? Next, if I had told a lie when I was pulled over last November, would I have been legally protected? Next question, is it true that the police can escape legal action through qualified immunity if they are ignorant of the law and violate it? Next question, do you have the benefit of qualified immunity? Asking that to the judge. And then the next question, do I have a qualified immunity? Next question, am I or are other people able to escape legal action if there is ignorance of the law? Next question, who is or was harmed and has authority to use arms to defend themselves here? Who is or was armed and has authority to use arms to defend themselves here in this court, and who isn't? Pointing out that when I was pulled over, the officers were armed, and in the court, the only armed people were the officers and the bailiff, I believe is that person. Next, is innocent until proven guilty just a trope, or is there a legal basis for it? Is it not part of the due process guaranteed and protected by Section 12 of the Utah State Constitution, as well as the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution? Next question, who in this court is being compensated monetarily for their time here today? And I believe the judge, the prosecutor, and the officer were being compensated. I was not. They were all there for interest other than justice, where I was only there seeking justice. Next section was government and courts' responsibilities. First question, does this court claim to be upholding the purpose for which just, legitimate governments are instituted among men, which purpose, as the Declaration of Independence states, is to protect the inalienable rights of the people? And if not, what is the purpose of this court? If so, and it was shown that the court was violating the inalienable rights of the people instead of protecting those rights, would its actions be moral and legitimate? Next question, am I correct in believing the judicial branch of government was established to protect the people from abuses that have occurred in the legislative and executive branches? Kind of a throwback to that issue earlier. If the other branches abuse their power, can the judicial branch be trusted to protect the rights of one of the people today? Next, or last question in that section, if the court upholds the abuses of other branches of government, will it be administering true justice? And I should have added functioning within within its legitimate authority. So then I have the question, who is St. George City, which was the plaintiff in the case? What is the difference between the city of St. George and the plaintiff, St. George City, which is all caps? So like there's a reason why it was all caps. Why is St. George City different than the city of St. George? I was trying to see if there was any light that could be revealed on that issue. And then I ask, is St. George City here today? And then I have, ask authority questions from the authority section here as well, such as, does St. George City have any natural rights, or where does it derive its authority from? Next section, the inalienable right to travel. Do people have the inalienable right to travel? What do these cases have to say on the matter? And then I had that I was supposed to refer to cases and statements about the inalienable right to travel. Next question, if travel is an inalienable right, is it justifiable for government established to protect the inalienable rights of the people to violate that right? And then next I have to give examples of traveling without license, such as back when our ancestors were traveling, to point out that it is indeed an inalienable right. I can usually say that word just fine, but not right now. Next section, the right to use property. I have the point to find cases and other instances where courts acknowledge that people do not have to register their private automobiles. And then in my notes and stuff I had sent previously to the court. I have cases and situations that show that recognize that an automobile is private property and does not need to be registered. And then I asked the question, was I deprived of my property? Because my car was impounded on the night that I received the ticket that the case was, the trial was concerning. Next section, contracts. Then I have the note about the Wayne Stumps letter, which you might be familiar with if you're watching this video. It's from Senator Stumps from Arizona in 1985, where the discussion about driver's licenses being a contractual issue. So that was the first point in this section about contracts. Does this court recognize the inalienable right of the people to make contracts or agreements with other people? Next, can a man be forced or coerced into a contract or agreement against his will? Or do force and coercion render the contract illegitimate? Next, is a driver's license contractual in nature? Next, if a man consented to a contract that lasted for a certain period of time, is the man subject to the terms of that contract during that period? Because if the driver's license is a contract and someone's consented to it, then you can argue that they were under a contract. But if that contract had expired and you were being ticketed for or on trial for driving with a suspended license, the contract was, if it's expired, then you are not under the terms of the contract because the contract is no longer valid at that point. Let's see, if the time period of that contract is ended, is the man still subject to the terms of that contract? I think that was the same question. Was the contract license, was my contract with the state, if they're assuming that a driver's license is an agreement, was it valid on the night I was pulled over? And then I asked, would you like me to give examples of times of contracts, such as people being employed or renting an apartment, and how those contracts can only be applied in certain situations when they're legitimate? Wow, this is already almost a half an hour, but I'm kind of almost finished. I'm well past halfway. After contracts, I have the section constitutions, and I have you, judge, sworn an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States of America? I should have had uphold in there as well. Have you read the Constitution? Have you, the judge, sworn an oath to uphold and defend the Utah State Constitution? Is it fair to say that governments... do I have that? Oh, I kind of have a mess up. I think the order is a little bit off here. I have the next question here. Is it fair to say that governments and those who have sworn oaths to uphold the constitutions which created those governments? That didn't make sense. I'll have to look at that later. Is it fair to say that the same might not be the case for people who have not sworn such oaths? Just basically the idea that people that have sworn an oath are understood that they have kind of submitted themselves to it, where if there isn't an oath, there isn't submission to it. Next question. Have you sworn any other oaths as part of your office, perhaps to uphold and defend the Utah Code? Am I on the right page? Yes, I am. Okay. Next question to the judge. Would you consider swearing an oath to be an important and serious action? Next question. Were you sincere and serious when you swore your oath? Next question. What are the consequences if you fail to live up to your oath? Next question. Have you read the Utah State Constitution? I guess I thought I would ask about reading the Constitution right after asking if they've sworn an oath to it, but I guess I had those questions in between to establish kind of a gotcha situation, where if the judge hasn't read the entirety of the Utah Constitution, then how serious can they be? Oh, that's my next question. If you have not read the Utah State Constitution, what can be said about the seriousness or legitimacy of your oath, your legal authority, and your honor if you've sworn an oath to uphold and defend something you've not read or aren't completely aware of? Next, and last question for that section. Do you have evidence that I have sworn any oaths to these constitutions? Next section is called abuse of power. First question in that section, can I reconfirm that the purpose of just government is to protect the inalienable rights of the people? Next, if the government does something in the name of safety or order, does that justify violating the people's inalienable rights? Next question, is there any point at which the government can confirm the complete safety of the people? The answer to that is no. Next question, is there any point at which the government can achieve complete order? Next, what is the purpose of a driver's license? Next, what is the purpose of vehicle registration? Next, if these policies violate the inalienable rights of the people, are they within the just legitimate responsibility or jurisdiction of government? I should maybe have asked. Next, and final question for this section, are the traffic rules, laws, codes, and policies perfect and absolute, or are they relative and subjective? Next section, deprivation of rights. And then I have that I was supposed to list the way my rights were violated, but I didn't, I guess, get to that section. Next question in that section, were you made aware that I was not exercising the privilege of driving, but was in the process of exercising my inalienable rights to use my property, my private property, and to travel? When I was pulled over, I was very clear that I was not driving and that I was exercising my inalienable right to travel. So I was just trying to establish that in the court, because it should have been on the video. I actually wasn't able to see the body cam footage because when they sent it to me, it wasn't working. And then when I, just last week went to look at it, didn't have access to it. And then I never saw that I was given access to the body cam footage. After deprivation of rights, I have the next section is conspiracy against rights. Then I have the question, who do you work for? And this is kind of the question that I wanted to ask to everyone, both judge, cop, and prosecutor. Next question, is your employer subject to the people? Next question, is your employer subject to the rules of the U.S. Code, UCC, or other set of rules? Follow-up question, are there other sources of rules which the court or city follows that do not derive their authority from the people? Next question, where does money coerced from the extorted people like me go? Trying to find out if that money goes into something, or if it somehow circles around that the people benefit, the judge, the cop are beneficiaries of that money that is extorted. I wanted to try to establish that. And then for those of you that are familiar with, U.S. section, or the U.S. Code 121, I believe, 18 U.S. Code 241, in conspiracy, it talks about some different things about conspiracy. And so I was trying to establish, I asked the question, do you usually wear these clothes? For the judge, it would be the robes. For the cop, it would be the uniform. I wanted to establish that they are not functioning within their natural living man situations, but that they are dressed indeed in a costume or a disguise of some type. Next is so that was the questions that I had for the judge. And then I knew that at some point I'd done a trial back in April, I believe. So I actually learned quite a bit from that, but definitely not enough. So then the next, I knew that the cop would be up on the witness stand. So I have this section for the question to the cops. And these are going to be used to create a contract when I get, if I get, at some point in the future, if I have to interact with cops, I'm going to have copies of this cop contract to establish all of this information right from the beginning. So the questions for the cop, and I'll go through these quickly. From where do you derive your authority as a police officer? Did you swear any oaths when you became an officer? Would you consider an oath to be a serious action? Did you swear an oath to uphold and defend the U.S. Constitution? Have you read the U.S. Constitution? Did you swear an oath to uphold and defend the Utah State Constitution? Have you read the Utah State Constitution? If not, are you saying you swore an oath to uphold and defend something that you aren't even fully aware of? Have you sworn any other oaths as part of your office, perhaps to uphold and defend the Utah Code? So would you say that you have higher responsibility to respect the Utah State Constitution or local traffic codes? Who are you employed by? Are you here on behalf of St. George City? Who is St. George City? What is your affiliation with them? Have you met St. George City? Which natural inalienable rights does St. George City have? Are you being paid to be here today? Do you have evidence that the rules, policy, codes, etc. of St. George City apply to me, or the Washington County, or Utah State? I could expand to all of those, I suppose. Then I ask, can you define consent? Is consent legitimate if coercion is involved? Do you personally have evidence that I have consented to be governed by Utah traffic codes? Is it your understanding that governments derive their authority from consent of the governed? Did you observe me causing injury or harm to any man or woman or anyone's property? Why did you initiate the stop? Were you enforcing a criminal law or a regulatory code? Are you aware that the people have inalienable rights? Can you define what an inalienable right is? If you witness a man or woman violating the inalienable rights of another man or woman, would you consider that to be a crime? Is it part of your duty as a police officer to protect the rights of the people? If you violate the inalienable rights of people, are you acting within the limits of your duties? And follow-up question, or are you committing a crime? Next, would you agree that the specific meanings of words in laws is important? Next, were you made aware that I was peacefully exercising my inalienable right to travel? Next, did you witness me engaged in any commercial activity on the roadway? Are you familiar with the difference between the words driving and traveling? Can you restate the code under which I was ticketed? I asked. Are you familiar with the difference between motor vehicle and an automobile? And can you restate the code I was accused of violating in regards to vehicle registration? Next question, or it's a section for the cop. Can other people do what you do? And first question in that section: if a random man or woman saw someone with an expired registration sticker, could they pull could they pull someone else over and have their car towed? Next question: if he did pull them over and have their car towed, what crimes would he be charged with? Or I guess he or she, considering what I just stated, that any man or woman. But I'm just going to stick with he and men in the general term. If he knew someone was driving without a valid driver's license, could he pull them over? If people can't do those things and you derive your authority and power from the people, how are you able to have powers that the people with superior authority don't have? Next, the section to establish conspiracy. Do you wear the outfit you're currently in during normal day-to-day activities? I guess the follow-up question would be, are you required to wear that as part of your duties? Next question, did you act alone or were others involved? Because conspiracy requires 2 or more people to get involved, and he called for backup or whatever, so other people were involved that were also dressed in disguise. Then I asked, who were the other officers that worked with you? Because he was the only one that arrived, though I think there were 2 others that came when he called for backup. Do you have training with these or other officers in how to coordinate during traffic stops and other situations? As in, is this just something that spontaneously happened, or do you guys plan how to conspire against people? And final question in the conspiracy section is, where does the money collected from the tickets you write go? Next section was about my car being towed. So I'm going to skip that. It's just a section where I asked their affiliation with the car towing company and stuff. And then I ask, this is kind of not under that section. Were you armed during this stop? Was I armed during this stop? Do you think the imbalance of power made me feel uncomfortable? And did I have the right to refuse the stop without the risk of force being used against me? So, this is the last section. And then, I ended up, in my first trial back in April, I did not take the stand, but I did. And I had not planned for that, and I should have done a lot more plan for my testimony. But I didn't get any cross-questioning from the prosecutor. And then I had this set as my closing statement. In this case, can it be proven that I caused any injustice, harm, wrong, or violation of anyone else's rights? If there's no valid injustice that has occurred, Would finding me guilty not witness to the people here today that the fundamental nature of government has turned upside down, where those who seek to live their lives in a just, moral, honorable, and free manner are harassed and violated by the very system and people who claim to be protecting their inalienable rights? Is it possibly the case that there is a much higher court today that is also taking note of right and wrong, justice and injustice, as well as honor and corruption? Will we be found by that court to be seeking what is truly just and right, or following the flawed and arbitrary rules, policies, and codes of mankind? I pray you'll consider those higher laws here and now. So that was my closing statement. I wanted them to be aware that justice is not only limited to that court, and that I'd been thinking about asking both the judge and the police officer as well if they're Christian, because implying that establishing that they might have a higher authority from which they derive, or that they've submitted themselves to higher than the court or the state or whatever. So that was my plans. I have some references and definitions. With that, I had parts of the Utah State Constitution that applied, I felt, to the case. I had this stuff from the Utah Code about the violations that I was supposedly violating, or the codes I was violating. I have the U.S. codes from 18 U.S. Code 241 to 242 about conspiracy against rights and the deprivation of rights under color of law. And then I had some other sections. I mentioned that I had the Wayne Stump letter. A lot of these I had submitted to the court, and I'll go over this more in the next video. But at the end, like, I had sent a lot of these cases and documents to the court, but he said that he didn't get them, and I knew that they had received them. They had been emailed to the court clerk, and so he said that he'd only received the motion to dismiss and then an email I had sent requesting more information and kind of proof of their consent last week. And he mentioned that, if it wasn't a proper motion and that it had to be done a week before, and I kind of said I had sent stuff before, and I knew it wasn't a motion. I knew it was just a request for information, and I kind of made the point that justice doesn't have a deadline a week before, that I have a right to ask questions and try to establish the validity of me being required to show up in court. So yeah, that's a little bit of that. I also had a couple pages with definitions that I had in a travel packet that look over such definitions of what a driver is, what motor vehicle is, what transportation is. I really didn't get to address any of those, but I did have them in case. And then I had this section of papers. I think it's 6 pages of court cases establishing different rights and case law regarding that. And yeah, I'll cover that in the end as well. That at the end, the judge did mention that if he had seen any case law, that he would have been on my side, but because he didn't, he had to uphold the situation in the court and the accusations, the codes I'd been accused of violating. And so, surprise, surprise, injustice was called justice. My rights violations were ignored, while my lack of violating anyone's rights was ignored, and their violations of my rights were ignored. So, kind of a long video. Hopefully you can listen to it at faster speeds. It'd be, I hope this helps someone else that's preparing for the case. That's my point in making this. Not only kind of to help myself learn from the situation, but maybe help other people that are in the situation so that they can better prepare for their case. The next video, I think, will be more helpful both for myself in the future and for people that are going on trial, so that they can kind of see my experience and the lessons I learned about court procedure and such. So thanks for your time. I hope that if you're going preparing for a trial, or just trying to establish your rights and be a free person, be one of the free people, a free man or a free woman living here on the land, best of luck to you. We got to stand up for our rights. We got to work with each other and help educate other people. And, what more can we ask? Thanks for your time. Take care.